Welcome back to the 2020 Macabre Month of Horror. If you are a horror fan, then make sure you subscribe and stick around because there is a ton of content coming out this month on this channel, all horror related.
On the news, they're talking about the comet.
Yeah.
Wheeler's comet.
After it passed, people get lost, they would end up in the wrong home. What? And they keep telling people that this can happen.
The chicken tastes like tuna. It must be Miller's comet. The whole neighborhood is out of power, except for a house about 2 blocks up.
What the hell is that? Mike, is that door locked?
I'll check it.
Baby, stay away from the door.
I can't stand this. I'm gonna go see what's going on. I'm sorry, but I'm going.
Today's review is for Coherence, a micro-budget sci-fi thriller. And you might be saying right now, Sam, what gives? I don't see horror listed as one of the genres, but I think it totally should be. It isn't horror in the traditional sense, sure. It's not full of murder or creatures or ghosts or anything like that. There isn't even any blood, really. I mean, someone gets a nosebleed, but that's about it. The story and presentation might not appear to be horror on the surface, but I'm covering it in this year's Macabre Month of Horror because Coherence gave me chills and mind-fucked me more than most horror movies do. Within the first half hour, I got chills 3 times. I had no idea where the plot was going at first, and it was wonderful to watch it unfold. I am going to be avoiding all spoilers and speaking very vaguely about the plot so that if you do decide you want to watch it, you can go in blind like I did. That's the way to go, I think. All that I'll say about the story is that we follow a group of 8 friends having a dinner party when a comet passes overhead and strange occurrences begin. Not saying anything else about the plot. I'll leave the mystery intact for you.
This is bad. This is really bad.
What's the box?
That was at the other house.
Oh my God. Baby, what did you see?
Hugh, what did you see?
As I mentioned at the start, Coherence was made for a tiny budget, just $50,000, which in filmmaking terms is next to nothing. It's also rumored that this $50,000 might actually be an inflated number a little bit. I found interviews suggesting that the real budget may have been closer to $16,000 worth of actual cash put into the production. The low budget is immediately apparent when you take a look at any of the footage from the film. The picture quality is pretty far from what you would expect to find in a standard studio film. Coherence was actually shot on just a couple of DSLRs, the same camera I'm shooting this review with. The visual side of Coherence is the definite weak point, and it might be enough to turn some viewers off entirely. So if you're looking at this footage right now and what you're seeing is just unbearable to you, then you probably will not have a good time with Coherence. And I would say just skip it if that's the case. To me, it's all made up for and then some with the script, but more on that later on. The cinematography of Coherence is pretty slapdash. It can feel quite amateurish a lot of the time. There's tons of excessive shaking and whip pans and whatnot. But it didn't bother me as much as the cinematography in something like Jeff Who Lives at Home, for example. To me, Coherence's cinematography wasn't much of a distraction past a few minutes into the film. I acclimated to it quickly, and I thought it was just enough to get the job done. But I wouldn't hold it against someone who couldn't get past the visual aesthetic of the film. I understand it can be kind of jarring. Part of the reason for the camera's constant unsteady and unplanned feeling is born out of utility. A lot of the film was actually shot multicam, meaning 2 cameras were rolling at once to capture different coverage, and for one scene early on, 3 cameras were used. There's also no blocking, which allows incredible freedom for the actors, but also means that shots cannot be carefully orchestrated with precise framing and movements. If you're unfamiliar with the term blocking, it basically means the positioning and movements of the actors within a scene. The vast majority of films rehearse precise blocking and staging, but some films, Coherence included, go for a more improvisational approach. And since we're talking about improvisation, Coherence is absolutely full of it. Coherence has an incredibly tight storyline, but virtually all of the dialogue is totally improvised by the actors within the scene. Improvised dialogue might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I'm a big fan of dramatic improvisation. I even made a whole video essay about it. Check out that video in the iCard or in the description. Instead of giving the actors lines and rehearsing with them, director James Ward Burkett gave them each a card with their motivations for that given scene on it. The film was shot in chronological order, which is another extreme rarity if you aren't too familiar with how movies are made. The actors were not given the full story in advance, except for one actor who co-wrote the film. That means that as the crazy elements of the film begin to play out, we're seeing the genuine reactions of those people. As unexplainable occurrences begin happening, both the characters and actors are learning of them for the first time, and the decisions they make are truly made in the heat of the moment. The exception to this is a few instances where the director had to step in and guide the actors a little bit more on target, or to stop them from doing things that would wreck the narrative. So there are some rails in place, but very loosely. I'm sure it made the editing of this film an absolute nightmare. There are all kinds of stories about the actors going on wild, lengthy tangents that then had to be completely cut from the film. And when you're setting everything in one location and not sticking to any pre-planned blocking, I would think it makes cutting scenes a real challenge. This is partially solved through a stylistic flourish the film adopts, wherein it cuts to black at various points throughout the film. It makes for a clean reset for the momentum of the film, as far as where the characters are and what they're in the middle of doing. They also cleverly use these cut-to-black moments in places that don't seem purely utilitarian as well. Using them to signify significant story shifts is a good way to keep these moments from feeling too much like an editing cheat, which it had the potential to. The actors didn't really know what kind of film they were in. One of them even said she thought it was supposed to be a broad comedy for much of the shooting, and it might show a little bit in her performance at the start, actually. The lead of these 8 dinner party guests had no idea that she was the protagonist out of all the others until really deep into the film. This film is full of overlapping dialogue, which is another thing I personally like, but we don't see too often in films. Maybe a little overlap here and there, but not often to this extent outside of a Robert Altman film. Sound guys especially hate overlapping dialogue because it's a lot harder to work with from that perspective. I find all of this experimentation an exciting way to execute this kind of story. If you're someone who needs a more tightly assembled kind of film, then again, Coherence might not be your cup of tea. It worked extraordinarily well for me, though. I was thoroughly gripped from the inciting incident all the way to the finale. My eyes were glued to the screen. There were so many smart ideas at play, clever recursions, and unnerving mindfuck moments, starting very early on and escalating well throughout. I have a real soft spot for impossibilities being treated heavily and rationally explored in films. It's just something I like, and Coherence delivered that in spades. A natural point of comparison to Coherence would be Shane Carruth's Primer, another smart indie sci-fi made for an even tinier budget of just $7,000. If you enjoyed Primer, I think there's a good chance you'll enjoy Coherence as well. I was also reminded of a film I haven't actually seen yet, if that makes any sense. The way I've heard The Man from Earth described, which I hope to see soon, by the way. It sounds quite similar in scope and execution to Coherence, so that may be another good point of reference if you're trying to decide if this is for you or not. Also, if you enjoyed the Remedial Chaos Theory episode of Community, you'll probably get a kick out of Coherence too. If Coherence sounds like your kind of thing, then I highly recommend it. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you aren't already, and keep checking back for the rest of the macabre month of horror.